The running back savior of 2023 will be that. More this week on the couch. Always happy to be joined by Paul Charchian. Paul, lots of injuries, lots of running backs falling by the wayside. Who's the savior? Is there a savior?
Well, I don't know that there's one person that I can go, well, this guy is going to save your season, because in most of these cases, these are shorter term injuries where people are going to be able to help you out for a game or 2 games or 3 games. We haven't had, thankfully, another Jerome Ford like situation with Nick Chubb where somebody's going to walk in, and Jerome Ford, legitimately has been something of a season saver for those that were able to get in on him. Most of the rest of these injuries that we've had haven't been season ending. So maybe there isn't one. If I had to just throw a name out right now, I think I go Craig Reynolds, because he can get on the field 2 different ways with 2 different guys getting hurt. And he's got so much upside in that offense. Anytime Gibbs misses time, Montgomery misses time. Yeah, maybe he might be the best of the bunch out of this group, but I don't know that there is one player. Do you have somebody in mind that I'm missing?
Not really. I think you're on the right track when you bring up Craig Reynolds. And I think of it in terms of, well, maybe it's Salvin Ahmed, maybe it's Jordan Mason. In terms of offenses, what offenses to have the capacity? Because we've seen a lot of running backs get opportunity in offenses, and it doesn't matter. Dante Foreman getting opportunity, that's great. Even Chuba Hubbard, he did some stuff against Miami last week, but come on. Carolina's offense is not going to produce a running back savior. Maybe it's Adam Thielen. Maybe that's the answer, right? It's just bulk up everywhere else, and you're just in the same boat with everybody if you're having trouble rubbing 2 sticks together at running back. But I think you're right to think of Craig Reynolds because of Detroit's offense, and I'm interested in throwing just a unit or 2, even somebody like Tyrion Davis-Price. I was talking.
Wow.
Well, but Paul, how many times have we seen that even within the space of a game? Well, let's take the Rams, for instance.
Sure.
Really, there's been 2 running backs this year, Kyren Williams and Raheem Mostert, just totally out of nowhere. I mean, I say out of nowhere, I mean fantasy football draft capital. We were all underestimating the Dolphins running game.
For sure.
One of the big stories is Mike McDaniel. Give Mike McDaniel another year to install his running game, and now you're going to see something. And let him pick a running back in Devin Achan. He was going to be the running back savior before he got hurt. So you can see, and now Raheem Mostert. So I'm looking at Miami's offense, Christian McCaffrey, looking in that offense. So we'll see. But in the space of a game, let's take the Rams, Kyren Williams. At the beginning of that game, Kyren Williams was the starter, and Ronnie Rivers was the backup, that if Kyren Williams gets hurt, Ronnie Rivers is the guy you want to have.
Right.
Now we have Zach Evans. Fascinating. Interesting. Zach Evans could be that guy. We could look back, Paul, and say he should have been the answer, simply because he has the talent. He has the goods to do it. And this offense was already giving us a running back savior. So I'm interested there, but I also know that Sean McVay might look at Myles Gaskin. He might look at Royce Freeman. Coaches like assignment sound running backs. So why wasn't Zach Evans getting any snaps? Probably because he wasn't necessarily reliable in an assignment sound way. But now the bar is a lot lower because you're getting guys who just learn the offense. But let's talk about injuries, because I think this is a good point to talk about injuries, because I've been trying to. I think fantasy football is therapy in and of itself, and then our shows, especially the time we spend together. I mean, hopefully at least it makes people feel less lonely, if not otherwise is fulfilling or leaves you in a better mood. And I've been trying to hit the note over and over, Paul, that fantasy football is like Paris to Dakar, that road rally that folks may or may not be aware of, where you win the race, or those races in Baja California, right? Yeah. You win the race by being able to finish the race.
That's right.
You don't win the race by having the fastest car. You don't win the race by having the best handling car, right? You don't win the race by having the best driver.
Yeah.
You win the race by keeping the car on the road and continuing to make progress towards a goal. And another metaphor I used, Paul, was like figure skating, because when we're preparing for our drafts, it's like, oh, I'm going to execute this move. Ooh, look at me do this. Look, I got my starting tight end in the 9th round. He's going to be in the top 5. And you think it's all going to come together so perfectly and so beautifully. And really, you're limping and dragging yourself. It's like a figure skating routine where they can tackle you and there's obstacles, right? And there's chunks of the ice missing, and you're going to fall and lose a busted tooth. And then you got to get up and try to do the next jump. And on the next jump, there's barbed wire you run into, but you just got to pick yourself up because everybody's doing the same obstacle course. Everybody's doing the same rally where it's hard to, you have to think of it like parts breaking down on your car. Like I got to slap Dante Foreman in there to keep my tire from falling off so my car can keep going. And I think that it's rewarding perseverance. It's rewarding still caring. It's rewarding. And one of our chat room members brought up whack-a-mole. And why I liked whack-a-mole. This is why I liked whack-a-mole, Paul. Because when you miss one, you can't be like, oh, you just got to keep swinging. Just keep hitting. Another one's going to pop up. Just keep swinging, right? That's what we do with the waiver wire, right? Just keep taking shots. But I know you wanted to talk about this. I mean, you wear a great hat in just the world of games. And I know you've taught us a lot about board games. You've invented or popularized a new game form of fantasy football in the guillotine leagues, which brings in a whole different set of considerations than the fantasy football we all cut our teeth on. And I know that injuries are on your mind today.
So with all the injury problems, all the running back is devastated. Quarterbacks are going down. And I think there's a temptation to be like, oh, why do I play this game? I had all these,
which is very valid.
I had all these hopes and dreams, and it's very hard to predict injury, and virtually impossible. And why am I playing this game when we introduce all these variables that injuries brings in? But Sig, I'm here to embrace the injury. Now, obviously, we don't want injuries. We don't want people to get physically hurt ever. But if this game was mathematical,
right?
If 1 + 1 = 2 every time we played, nobody play. We are here for the variables. We are here for the differing outcomes. We are here for the day-to-day drama. We are here to find out who's going to succeed, who's going to fail. And one of the biggest failure metrics is, of course, injury. And what it does is it acts as a separator on luck. Because I think it's far easier for an unskilled or uncaring fantasy player to draft okay, and then keep their draft roster healthy, and then just sort of cruise into the playoffs and maybe maybe something good happens. The real skill comes when your draft day team, which might have been great, gets torpedoed by injury, and now you've got to really adapt and work your ass off. Now we find out who's really skillful, or at least skillful in the in-season component of fantasy, which to me is the biggest and most important part. And this is how we differentiate good and bad players, those who care, those who don't care, and those who are trying every week to find that little sliver of angle and that little edge. And so in that regard, I embrace the injuries. We follow it very closely. The people who listen to this podcast follow it very closely. And I think this is our opportunity to shine and our opportunity to prove that we can be better, smarter, harder working, better at adapting than other people. To use your figure skating metaphor, figure skaters got every single move mapped out, right? When you go on the ice to do your 2.5 minute routine, every single step has been mapped out in pre-practice and everything else. Yeah. And if there weren't all the things that go wrong, the chipped ice and all the things you mentioned, you could just go execute your routine. But fantasy football introduces all these variables, and it gives us an opportunity to improvise and improve our mettle. So I say not bring on the injuries, but we'll be ready. We'll adapt, and we will overcome.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that pops right into my mind as you make that rousing speech, Paul, is we always see that the team that wins the championship, I mean, in an obvious, straightforward way, it's the team that's the best during the 3 weeks of the playoffs. Sometimes just the last week of the playoffs, really. Mm-hmm. But it's also, if you take a step back too, it's often the team that was best in the second half of the fantasy football regular season, or at the very least the last 3 or 4 weeks. And I always bring up the team that sneaks in the total points, or the number 6 spot, the last spot, that then runs the table in the playoffs because they were one of the highest scoring teams. Someone should run the numbers out there of the highest scoring fantasy teams from, say, week 10 to 13 that make the playoffs, and then whether they perform above or below the seed they are in the playoffs. Because my guess is that those points are a little more predictive of how you're going to do, and how you get those points is by keeping up with everything. But yeah, I think you're right. It's about adapting. It's about staying in the game and not just letting the teams that coast, the teams that are 8-1 by week 9, and then the seas get choppier for them as the playoffs are getting close, never win. The number 1 seed, I think when we reflect on our fantasy football leagues, the number 1 seed rarely wins.
Yeah.
It's about really staying in tune with what's happening now, and it continues to change. And not just in terms of injuries, but injuries are important, not just by who's missing time and who are the replacements and who can you pick up. But I'm going to be watching, Paul, like Josh Allen's shoulder injury or Justin Fields' thumb when he comes back, because players can be playing, and any number of players. Devontae Adams, I think, is a good example of a guy who's playing, but he's not healthy right now.
Right.
And that can also affect things. But that's where, like you said, it's not purely luck, it's skill. And the last thing I'll add to this before we get back down to some specifics is, guess what? Injury luck affects who wins the Super Bowl too.
Great point. Great point. Yes.
We're mapping this to football, right?
For a multi-billion-dollar industry, they got the same issues as our leagues with a $35 entry fee.
Right, which is the same. And that's what the game we're trying to. I know not everyone agrees that fantasy football should have some connection to football, but I mean, if we have touchdowns worth 6 points, isn't that a basic statement of purpose that we're mimicking football here?
Yeah.
In football, the team that sometimes is the best team can have the worst injury at the worst time. It can all be for naught. And then some team that was just cruising and getting a wild card can all of a sudden find themselves in the Super Bowl. We almost saw it happen with the Browns whenever Patrick Mahomes went down a few years back. Yeah. Chad Henne made that amazing scramble to save the game.
That was amazing, wasn't it? Oh.
A very memorable play. One of the most memorable backup quarterback plays, unless we're not counting Nick Foles as a backup for his whole career. So so these things happen, and I agree with you. Now, I still want to give some attention to the other side of, if you're playing fantasy football and it's frustrating and you think, wow, there's so many things out of my control. Why am I even telling myself that the outcome of my season is under my control? I want to find something better to do. You probably can find something better to do. But if you can't, or you don't want to, because you're here with us, let's dig into some different things that are going on right now. And I think that, of course, Paul, we're going to start with Minnesota, because you're right there. And you weren't necessarily wrong to say there might be running backs better than Alexander Mattison, but not on the Minnesota roster.
Yeah, as it turns out, right?
As it turns out. And it doesn't, and you, I mean, I'm going to give you a partial W on that, just because they traded for Cam Akers. So that showed me that somebody in the Vikings front office was saying, we need to improve our running back room. But
Madison hasn't been a reliable fantasy starter. I mean, we're talking about a guy with no touchdowns. Right. He's got 2 games under over 44 rushing yards. He's really had, middling is, I think, kind for him. Now he does have a couple of receiving touchdowns, and in fairness, I need to recognize that. But not a gifted receiver by any stretch. So, it's kind of a plodding season for Madison. And here there's a lot of concern over Alexander Mattison as the lead back, and what it says about a front office that really thought he could be a lead back. They were right on getting out of Dalvin Cook,
right,
when they did, but they really misread what Alexander Mattison could do as the lead back.
And I think what it leads to, Paul, is it's almost like the last season, let's just say last season, with all the 1-score victory luck and things like that. It was just a dream they woke up from, because there was a lot of debate. I know going into last season or off season, there was a lot of talk about, well, what do you do with guys like Harrison Smith and Adam Thielen and Eric Kendricks?
Yeah.
And these players, Kirk Cousins, that Dalvin Cook, that are not going to be part of whatever comes next. And you bring in a new GM and an unconventional GM. A GM that does not have a lot of experience on the operations side of football. And then you have Kevin O'Connell, who's a young head coach. And I'm assuming, and I don't think the ownership of the Vikings is the kind of ownership that we're seeing in other places that leans in and gets way too involved on the
They're
football
not.
side.
I can assure you they are not.
So they're going to give him 3 to 5 years, right? I mean, they're just going to,
Probably.
as a courtesy, like they wouldn't try this. They're not that stupid. They're not going to do something and then say it didn't work after 2 years, so we're going to pull the plug. So next year, Paul, next year is when what they can do with this new regime. I think that's when it starts.
Next year they'll be drafting another quarterback.
Yeah.
I don't believe my understanding of the situation is that the likelihood is that the Vikings are not going to re-sign Kirk Cousins.
Right.
He will go elsewhere. Which then, if you believe that's the case, then really the Vikings have 2 weeks to move him or get nothing for Kirk Cousins.
And he doesn't want to move, right? I mean, do you believe that report? Do you think that was a specious report, or do you think that's accurate that Kirk Cousins is like, yeah, no thanks?
He equivocated when asked directly about whether or not he would waive his no trade clause. He said, I'm looking at my next opponent.
Good.
You know, at the time it was Chicago.
Future head coach.
Yeah, right. And so, you know, he didn't say no. And the place that I've been banging the drum here locally for is the landing spot is Atlanta. Atlanta to me is a very solid team everywhere other than quarterback. His wife is from the area. They have family there. They vacation there. They already have a connection to geographically to that city. Not that that matters a lot, but you know, these are the soft sell things that might put somebody into a tipping point. And then, man, Kirk Cousins, organizationally for the Falcons, he makes so much sense. Kirk Cousins can unlock the draft capital they sunk into Drake London and Kyle Pitts in a way Desmond Ridder simply isn't, I think, ever going to, and he can do it now. I mean, the Falcons are, with Kirk Cousins, the Falcons suddenly turn into a playoff-bound tier 2 team that's got, you know, that has immediate relevancy in the NFC. And, you know, without him, they might find their way into a first round 100% guaranteed loss in the playoffs.
Right.
So that's, yeah, it all makes some sense where that is a possible landing spot for Kirk. And of course, at that point, the Vikings are in, you know, full-blown rebuild mode.
Well, here's my question about the Vikings offense, with or without Kirk Cousins, but with Kirk Cousins for now. I think that's a great line to draw too, because Arthur Smith last week, if you saw the comments after the game, he said, yeah, we can't turn the ball over that much.
Yeah.
And I know they want Desmond Ridder to hit. I know they want him to just be adequate. If Desmond Ridder's adequate and you can have an adequate starting quarterback with the way they have that roster built, that might be okay. And you have your quarterback on a rookie deal. So now we can really start having a bonanza in free agency to match the one they had this past offseason. But if he's not going to work, I mean, they can win the 9-8 will win the NFC South this year. Right. I'm pretty sure. I mean, Carolina's not doing it. Tampa Bay, they're flawed to say the least. And New Orleans is flawed to say the least. Atlanta is the best team if they can just get mediocre quarterback play.
Right.
But it is up to Kirk Cousins, and we'll see. Only Kirk Cousins knows. Kirk Cousins has had quite the journey in the NFL, but it always has involved belief in self and trusting himself. And he does what he wants to do. So here's my question to sort out the Minnesota offense, okay? Because we've seen 2 games this year where they had a lead over a vastly inferior opponent. I mean, once you took Justin Fields away, come on. And they just coasted into the driveway. They didn't really try to do anything and barely passed the ball. And it was disappointing. Now, was that what happened last week, just like against Carolina? Or is it, hey, the Bears' defense is not good. So really what happened is this is what the offense looks like without Justin Jefferson. Get used to it.
I think it's more the latter. We know the Bears defense is deeply flawed. They did get a couple of guys back in their secondary, which made them non-awful, but still very, very beatable. And this offense, which was really constructed almost entirely to go through Justin Jefferson and take advantage of defenses that had to try to stop that, really didn't diversify itself and show out in any meaningful way. And putting up 19 points on a Bears team, no, and actually less, because one of the touchdowns was a defensive touchdown, is by any measure a disappointment. The running game never got on track. Alexander Mattison averaged, I think, 2.5 yards per carry in that game. TJ Hawkinson was a minor factor. He keeps dropping passes. He's now sitting at, I believe, 1 reception on 7 contested catches this year for TJ Hawkinson. And thriving as a fantasy player only on sheer volume at this point. Didn't see Osborne, Addison really pop in the absence of Justin Jefferson like we wanted to. Now it's 1 weekend. Maybe that's going to change, but here comes the 49ers on national television, and it seems unlikely that this offense takes a meaningful step forward next week. So schedule gets easier after that, but maybe it doesn't matter at that point. They'll be 2-5 at that stage.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it forces a franchise to ask itself questions about where this is going and what this is all for. And like you said, the trade deadline's coming up. And we could talk a little bit about trade deadline speculation. It's probably going to be NFL trade deadline stuff ends up being more of a letdown than anything that really gets the juices flowing. Denver's going to trade a receiver or two, maybe to Carolina, maybe to Indianapolis. I don't think it's going to change anything for anybody, really. I think you're looking at basically the same thing. Well,
hold on just a second.
Yeah.
Let's just talk the non-zero chance that Justin Jefferson gets traded.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. I mean, it's not a high chance, but it's non-zero, Sig. So here's why it could go down this way. Vikings have, again, my belief is the Vikings have really targeted quarterbacks in this next draft. Kirk Cousins is going to leave. Justin Jefferson, they've been working on a deal for a year to try to extend Justin Jefferson. Hasn't happened yet. There could be a lot of frustration we don't know about for both sides on that side of it. If you're going to reboot the quarterback and you've got the opportunity to secure yourself massive equity in Justin Jefferson, maybe you have to do that. And that's, you could just say, you know what, if we're going to tear it down to the studs right now. And we're going to get all the draft equity we can. And this is the ultimate sell high moment for Justin Jefferson. This might be our chance. And I can understand why, it's reasonable that it could go down that way. 2% chance, but it's not totally off the table. And I think if the Vikings really feel that there isn't a contract to be had with Justin Jefferson, and they don't want to run into next year where they've got to franchise tag him, which would only be bad for everybody involved, then the trade scenario is alive.
Yeah, well, I think what this conversation stands for is the idea, again, that all the possibilities are on the table for a team that is just now, even though they took over 2 seasons ago, is just now looking at, okay, what's our long-term plan?
Yeah.
And this was some potentially well-founded criticism in hindsight when they didn't just say, okay, don't look at it in a 1 or 2 year window. Look at it in a 3 to 5 year window. Who of this team is going to be here in 3 to 5 years? If the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then let's figure out what we have here. And like you said, in hindsight, just releasing Dalvin Cook ended up working out wonderfully. So you're right. And I think next year he'll have the 5th year option. And then you get into the franchise tags. And this is where we get into the current CBA. Yeah. But hey, if the Vikings want to play it, just, hey, this is within our rights. This was all in a CBA that, well, I guess Justin Jefferson didn't sign it because he was a 2020 rookie, but a lot of other NFL players signed it or voted for it. This is the rights that we have, and we're going to exercise our rights. They can, in effect, have Justin Jefferson on a 7-year deal, but at the same time, if you're willing to give him the 5th year option next year, and you're willing to give him a franchise tag and a 6 year 7, why not just package that up front, like $100 million guaranteed 4-year deal or something like that, and at least patch over the optics. But what we don't know, Paul, and this is why, and this actually I think might be the best argument in favor of what you're saying, that there's a non-zero chance, is that Justin Jefferson, in his rights, if you were advising Justin Jefferson, Paul, what would you be telling him to ask for? $35 million a year? At least $30 million a year, right?
Yeah, and it's a lot. Highest paid receiver for sure, and he'll probably want something like quarterback money.
Yeah, 9 digits up front. Up front guaranteed like 120 to 150 million, maybe on a 7-year, $220 or $230 million deal. And it's funny when you say quarterback money, because he's not even asking for quarterback money. He's really just asking for mediocre quarterback. He's asking for Kirk Cousins money. Point. Yeah, that's he's not asking for Patrick Mahomes money. He's asking for Kirk Cousins money.
But then if you do give that rules out Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins wants Kirk Cousins money too, and you probably can't do both.
Yeah, well, I think that it just doesn't. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it just doesn't make sense to go forward. I think with paying Kirk Cousins what the market is going to demand that he gets paid next year. I just don't. I do not think it makes sense for the Vikings as a franchise. But I like that you're putting in these possibilities out on the table, and I think what it represents is Vikings are at a crossroads, and the decisions that they are making are very important. It's so interesting how the NFC North has changed over the last few years, because I think you have, Chicago's in a perpetual teardown. I think Chicago has to, they just have to ask themselves, do we want, and it sounds like from talking to Bears fans, everybody is in agreement that the head coach should go. The GM, there's not agreement. So maybe let the GM have this 2 top 5 pick draft capital wallet and see what they can do with it, all revolving around the decision with Justin Fields. And that's driving, what you're going to do with these picks. And then you have Green Bay. I feel like Green Bay is one of those, if you do the same thing, expect different results. It's just, this team is, they're a tough out with a good defense. When Aaron Jones is on the field, they have some punch on offense. But I think we're all seeing that Jordan Love isn't the answer. Jordan Love, there's a reason he didn't play. There wasn't trade talk for him or otherwise talk that they're so excited about what they have in Jordan Love. It was okay for a few weeks, but I think we can see his limitations. It's Detroit. Let's take a Detroit appreciation moment, Paul. I said this morning, they're a good team. We're not asking if they're a good team anymore.
Oh no, they're in. Team. Right now, if you had to name your number 1 seed in the NFC playoffs, Detroit Lions is they're the betting favorite. They're scheduled the rest of the way. Oh man, it's just patsy after patsy. There is no challenge coming, and that offense is going to be humming. There's going to be It's going to be a coast to the finish line for the Lions, and they're so easy to root for, and they're so much fun, and it's so easy to be happy for Lions fans who have been languishing for all this time, Sig. Mm-hmm. And who doesn't root for Amon-Ra St. Brown, keeping track of all the teams that passed on him, and Dan Campbell with, the style that he's got. And the story for Jared Goff is, it's, you wouldn't, made for Hollywood stuff, right? Yeah. It's such a great story. It's, we love all of this. It's so easy to root for the Lions, and, they're the class of this division for sure. And they legitimately are in the same conversation with San Francisco and Philadelphia and Dallas.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair. And Ben Johnson's he's going to get to pick his head coaching job. He will. Jared Goff. I've got to give Brad Holmes credit here, because some of this is the NFL is a league of relationships. And of course he would have a great relationship with his old Rams organization. Mm-hmm. And the Rams were looking, and the Jared Goff trade, one of those first round picks, was thought of as a courtesy for taking on Jared Goff's contract.
Right.
And now Jared Goff is a pretty desirable quarterback, and they're set, and they've got alignment. And another thing that I always think about, how can you not love Dan Campbell? We've talked about this. Cecil and I talked about this morning, that one of the things about Dan Campbell is love. You just see the love that he loves. There's love. There's love in that building. There's love in that man. There's love among the players. There's love. It's not an exaggeration. It's love connecting all those players. But I remember when he was hiring his coaching staff, and it's full of former players.
Yes, it is.
And he said, it's because if you're a former player who becomes a coach, that means you're hungry, because you have to go from being a player and having, different privileges and treatment and things. You go back down to the bottom of the food chain as a coach.
Very true.
And you have to be the one who runs and does errands and all these other things. You have to want it. You have to really want it. And
you don't Aaron Glenn didn't walk into being a defensive coordinator.
No.
And I don't have his path in front of me, but I'm guessing he was the assistant cornerback coach for some team, and had to, work his way up to defensive coordinator over the span of 10 years. And it's a really valid point. And it's funny how Hard Knocks has given us this peek into the lives of people like Dan Campbell, but you could see it then when the Lions were still viewed as a loser organization 1 year ago, a year and 6 games ago. And when they came out of the first half of last year with like 1 or 2 wins, but you already saw the groundwork there for who he was and what he could make of that organization.
Yeah, and And the other thing I remember about Dan Campbell, I just love Lions Appreciation Hour. Let's cap it off here. When he was the interim head coach for Miami, and it was one of those just play out the string kind of years, when they talked about candidates to be the permanent head coach, he was mentioned as one. And it was surprising. It was shocking to some people. And I think there was even some reassurances like, no, seriously, they like him. No, really, they're really considering it. And people were incredulous. This is back like 2013, 2014, something like that. And I think that was your foreshadowing about Dan Campbell. So to answer your question, by the way, Aaron Glenn retired in 2008. And then in 2012, or sorry, in 2010, he officially retired as a member of the Texans. In 2012, he was the general manager of the Houston Stallions in the Texas Lone Star Football League, an indoor league comprising exclusively teams from Texas. And then later on in 2012, he became a personnel scout for the Jets. So he started out as a scout.
Wow, as a scout.
And if you know anything about the football world, that the bot. I mean, they 25 for 25, $25,000 a year for 25-year-olds. I don't know. It's probably updated now with inflation, but yeah. And then he became the assistant defensive backs coach for the Browns in 2014. So he had to work as a scout for a couple of years just to become the assistant defensive backs coach. Now he's another one. The improvement in the Detroit defense has just been astounding since that week 2 overtime loss to Seattle. Well, what are some angles here? I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could go. You know, it wasn't necessarily a great waiver wire week. We've talked about some of the different running back possibilities. Devin Singletary is an interesting guy we could talk about after what Houston did with him, or just the Texans offense in general. Can we
touch on Houston if you don't mind?
Yeah, let's do
it. And first, I have to have my moment of mea culpa, because I was all in on Dameon Pierce. I was extremely excited about Dameon Pierce. Thought he's a special runner, and actually I still do. You put 8 linemen on injured reserve, and it's going to be tough. And I watch him very closely because I drafted him in a lot of leagues, really following like every run. He's got nowhere to go. It's just the run blocking in Houston is so bad. And at the end of the day, it's still my mistake. Now I'm owning it, but there's a lot of circumstance that goes with it. Now, interestingly, even with the 8 linemen, they've been a pretty good pass blocking unit, and they throw the ball like crazy. So, we've seen CJ Stroud, who's right now in the thick of Offensive Rookie of the Year with Puka Nacua coming back to the pack a bit here. He's right in it. I think Laporta is the other name that I think it's a 3-way race right now. But I saw Singletary got the big uptick in work, and he's averaging about a yard per carry more. I don't know that this is a Dameon Pierce shortcoming or not, but just the fact is they're desperate at running back, and desperate teams do things and make changes. And so there might be some opportunity for Singletary here that, maybe they feel like they need to just shake this up and see what they've got.
Well, I think that the running game is going to improve. They had a good run blocking offensive line projected, right? And then Howard gets hurt, Huntsell gets hurt. And with CJ Stroud, clearly the most advanced passer of the rookie quarterbacks, and what he's done for this team, you have to think the pendulum will swing back. And that was the argument for holding on to Pierce. But like you said, especially on goal line carries, he's always met in the backfield. Pierce always met in the backfield on goal line carries. It's terrible. It's like a jailbreak. And you see the team turn to Singletary, and Singletary outproduces him. And Singletary actually had more snaps. Now, this could easily end up being a situation where neither back breaks away from the other in terms of workload, and neither of them has consistent fantasy value. Alternatively, after the bye, maybe this team can get some things worked out, because we are talking about Bobby Slowick, a Shanahan disciple. It sure seems like you said, well, he put together a passing game that seems to be working with that same banged up offensive line. So give it time. And this is one of the things I've been emphasizing this week a lot in the shows we've been doing, Paul, is things will continue to change. Don't think it's like, well, we're 6 weeks in, so now we know this is where we stand. These are the good teams and bad teams, good run defenses, good running games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just what we're going to have until the fantasy football season's over. No, it's going to continue to change. And I think that it's possible that with some time to assess where things are not clicking and better health from the offensive line, this could be a situation that maybe could support 2 fantasy relevant running backs. And maybe the answer is the savior, going back to our original question, Paul, is maybe it's Devin Singletary, and he might be available because he's on bye.
Yeah, maybe. He's cheap to acquire right now. That's for sure. I just don't. Have you seen moments from Singletary to suggest he's a workhorse back, a lead back for a team? And maybe Buffalo just underused him. They underused Zach Moss apparently for years.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I'll say this about Devin Singletary. He's always productive. He adds value to his touches. When you watch Devin Singletary, he has that classic contact balance, yards through, yards after contact, even though he's a smaller running back. And sure enough, he does add value to his touches. And every time the Bills would rely on him, he would answer the bell. Oftentimes it would take injuries. It would take until it's late in the season.
Right.
And not just for fantasy, they were a good offense when he was on the field. So I just think that he just has to wait until teams exhaust every other option. And then they go to him and say, oh, yeah, that's right. He's good.
Well, maybe it's going to work out that way. I still want to believe. I still want to believe in Pierce, and I'm tempted to buy low on Pierce. If I weren't already heavily invested in so many leagues, I would be doing it more. But it feels like this is a almost career low watermark on Pierce. You can get him awfully cheap right now.
Sure. And I think that buying low on the Houston offense, look, I'm back to, March, April, May kind of thinking. I'm like, just give me parts of these offenses. Give me parts of these offenses. The other thing, I guess, is trying to find other Adam Thielens, right? So if we look and we say, who are the saviors? And what does Adam Thielen have going for him? He's in such a limited offense that he's the thing that works.
Right.
And maybe it's Kendrick Bourne. Let's look for limited offenses. Wow, New England comes to line right away. Maybe Deontay Johnson once he's back for the Steelers, where you're looking for these volume plays, if we're looking for potential saviors. But again, what's the theme here? Struggle, overcoming obstacles, just continuing to chip away and find advantages. I guess I'm trying to think, there's not even really a lot of great burning questions this week. I feel like your keynote about wanting to talk about injuries is really apt because I do think there's a little bit of fatigue right now in fantasy football and fantasy football hive mind about dealing with all this. But I guess, Paul, I'll toss it to you and just say this, like 6 weeks in an overall way, like how's your fantasy season going? Who are you looking at other than Dameon Pierce as maybe players that let you down or players that are saving you or otherwise when you're managing your teams this week? What's on your mind?
Can I tell I think a guy that's fun to talk about that we haven't mentioned that is really been helping my Guillotine League teams a lot because he's been performing at a reasonable level, finally scored a touchdown. Zay Flowers is really good.
Yes. Yeah.
And he leads the team in targets, receptions, routes run. I mean, that passing offense is starting to move through him. And my preseason worries that he was going to spend 60% of his snaps in the slot has not come to pass at all. He is playing equally left, right, center, XYZ. And that kid has got something. Now, the small size, I think, really limits some of like the high end touchdown. I don't think he's may ever be a double-digit touchdown guy, but boy, there's some signs through 6 weeks that Zay Flowers is going to be a meaningful contributor to that pass offense for a long time.
Yeah, he was a good one where we saw, and I suppose Raheem Mostert became this guy pretty quickly. Okay, where sometimes what we do in fantasy football, Paul, is we have a pretty good inkling that there's going to be production in a wide receiver group or a running back group. But at the time of drafts, we have no idea. We have no idea who it's going to land on. And it could be one of those things where it changes from week to week. Cecil likes to talk about windows. There's a 3-week window. And look at the backfield for the Dolphins. There was a Achane window. Now there's a Mostert window. Hopefully, knock on wood, he stays healthy. But if Mostert goes down, maybe it's an Achane window again. Maybe it starts a little bit earlier. It's a Salvin Ahmed window or Jeff Wilson window. And in the Dolphins backfield, nobody was going higher than the 9th or 10th round pick, which in hindsight is just wow. Well, no, and what's good about fantasy football is we self-assess and we try to learn, right? So now we know, and we didn't give Mike McDaniel enough credit to really develop this running game. This is why I'm fascinated about Bobby Slowick with a little bit more time to work on the concepts, right? It's just a week. It's not an off season, but it's still something. And we should have been drafting all of these running backs like Achane and Mostert should have been based on, in hindsight, because this is an historic running game right now by any measure. And in some cases, by some measures, the best, like a yards per carry through 6 games, like the best that we've seen. And likewise with Baltimore, we were excited about the possibilities of Todd Monken's pass offense for Lamar Jackson, and a Ravens organization that has bought into Lamar Jackson and said, we're paying you, we're committing
financially,
to you.
yes,
right. And go ahead
on that. The funny thing is, it's still a low volume passing offense.
Right.
Which shocked me. I mean, we really, everything that they talked about was that this was going to be, this is going to be a high volume passing offense. It's changed. Lamar Jackson is 30th in pass attempts per game. 30th. Maybe Todd Monken has come to some of the same conclusions that Greg Roman did, and that he's just going to his strengths. And that's just part of what Lamar Jackson's always going to be, is a 29 to 32 pass per game guy.
Well, but see, this is where I'm going to step in and say, maybe we need to open our minds a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It was choppy at first. Remember, Mark Andrews wasn't out there in week 1. Zay Flowers was a rookie. Odell Beckham's been banged up. Rashad Bateman. True. I know this one hurts for the Minnesota folks.
It does.
Rashad Bateman.
He was so good.
I hope it's just temporary. He just doesn't look like himself. He just does not look. And when you watch, there was the interception. It was just where you watch him play, and you can just tell that his body is just not giving him the reaction that he's looking for to play NFL. So it's choppy, but you're seeing. I know the Steelers upset of the Ravens. It was a big rallying cry for all of us Steelers fans, but it was right there. There were drops. The downfield passing is starting to come online. And even last week, you saw they didn't need to really push it. They were ahead 18-3 at the half. I'm interested to see what happens in this Baltimore-Detroit game, although Detroit's defense has vastly improved. I do think that with the pass offense, what we see when we watch the Ravens and we look for where are the signs of the Todd Monken pass offense, I think we might see a lot more in November, December than we did in September, October. But you hit on the key point, which is Zay Flowers. So what I was going to say was, because it was Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman, who's it going to be?
Yeah.
Nobody was going very high. Zay Flowers started to trend up in August because he was having such a good training camp, and everybody was talking about how much of a veteran he seemed like, even though he was a rookie. And now he has emerged as the clear top wide receiver. And if there's going to be a deep threat in this offense, he's the guy. And he has been getting open deep, and you have seen him hook up, Lamar Jackson hook up with him. I think that you're seeing him where the best potentially is yet to come with Flowers and Lamar Jackson at this point, when we're looking at second half breakout potential. Just on that topic of things that may change or things that we're trying to get a handle on. What else?
Well, let me hit you with it. Let's go to the guy taking one spot before Zay Flowers in the draft, Quentin Johnston. We've now gotten a 2-game sample size of Quentin Johnston without Mike Williams, and there's nothing to show for it to this point. He's managed 1 catch in the 2 non-Mike Williams games, despite seeing a more than roughly doubling of snap count from before the injury. Right. So what are your thoughts on Quentin Johnston and the fact that he hasn't been a meaningful part of this offense, even when the injury kicked in, which I think all of us reasonably assumed that would be a delineating point of time where Quentin Johnston could make himself known. And obviously it's 6 weeks into his rookie year. Nobody's suggesting that it's not going to work out. But what are your thoughts to this?
Yeah, I think that we should have seen this coming. We should have seen this coming because the Chargers said, I think explicitly, we have to push him into a role that we aren't sure he's ready for. And by necessity. And also, even the scouting report on him, I'm again cite Matt Waldman, RSP, talking about how, hey, his best use right now might be as a run after catch threat on short passes. And even though he's a big, fast guy, that doesn't mean that he's a contested catch guy. It doesn't mean he's a downfield threat yet. But now I think that they're being forced to use him in ways that he's not yet ready to succeed. From the long view, the question is does he have the mental toughness to learn from that and overcome that adversity and take it back and maybe next year or year 3? Because we're both old enough, Paul, to remember that you weren't supposed to judge wide receivers until year 3.
Year 3.
Once upon a time,
That's
right? Like
right.
you're not allowed to say whether they're a failure or success until year 3.
Now it's week 3.
Now it's week 3. That's it. That's the pull quote right there. So does it hurt his confidence? And it isn't one of those things that, but I think you can see what his impact's going to be for this year. I think there is some potential there with Josh Palmer, although you can just count on the Chargers to underachieve. That's why it's so remarkable when a team does what the Lions are doing, because sometimes you feel like the curse almost travels with the laundry or the logo or something like that. Yeah. No matter who the players are, who the coaches are, there's this sense, maybe it's the hive mind of the fans and expectations. I don't know though, but the Chargers, how there even are fans. I wanted to ask you, let me save that for off the rails. I'm going to save the Chargers fan thing for off the rails. But I think that I want to bring up another possibility second half, right? We get news that Kyler Murray is getting ready to practice. Is this something you want to get out ahead of? Are you happy here? Are you excited here that Kyler Murray, maybe it was Cliff all along and Kyler without Cliff could be a lot better?
I'm so dispirited with where we are right now on Kyler Murray and his career arc, because I think he could have been a lot better. I don't trust his maturity at all. And I don't love his development. I don't feel like he's a materially better quarterback today than he was when he came into the league. I think he's only a slightly better quarterback. I worry that this team that's making a run to the top of the draft is going to take a quarterback at the top of the draft. Even with the $250 million or so they've got sunk into Kyler Murray, they could be looking to try to move him, which I don't know how plausible that even is. Could showcase him down the stretch, Kyler Murray, give him a bunch of reps, try to hope that he looks good and start building some trade value for him, which would make a ton of sense. And the great thing about that scenario, Sig, is you don't have to defend it. He's your starting quarterback. So even though Josh Dobbs has played, I think, way better than expectation, you put Kyler Murray in anyway, and you hope he plays well enough that you find some suitors, and then you go draft your next quarterback, which to me would be the ideal scenario for them. But in that case, Kyler Murray becomes fantasy relevant again. He does have a unique skill set, but the mobility was the biggest thing that we were there for, not the passing. And off an ACL, the mobility will not be there. And that's why I'm fundamentally not interested.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair. Where I'm interested more is if he is, and let's give some credit to Joshua Dobbs and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't judge quarterbacks until year 6 or whatever it was for Joshua Dobbs. Right. Well, he's made himself a lot of money. I mean, for real, he's made himself probably tens of millions of dollars this year. He's going to have a nice career as a backup quarterback now, a really nice career. He's gotten enough opportunities that he's done really well for himself, and he has outperformed any reasonable expectations. But is that masking that really it's the Arizona offense and Arizona's organization under Jonathan Gannon, Drew Petzing, who you know from the Kevin Stefanski tree, to get this together and to make the best out of, maybe it is a bottom of the league roster, which should put into focus what they've been able to do with Joshua Dobbs, quarterback.
Yeah.
What could they do with Kyler Murray, who still is limited and still is making the same mistakes? And like you said, not necessarily developing, but he also has some things that fluster defenses. You also have seen him put up some massive games in the past. So I'm fascinated. I think we may in the future have a conversation, Paul, that said, well, wow, if we just would have traded for Marquise Brown, if we just had gotten out ahead of that, if we just had gotten out ahead of maybe even Trey McBride as a waiver wire pickup this week as they are changing the guard. And let's continue to watch for that. Devin Singletary wasn't the only one. There are other situations last week where teams are starting to show they're ready to make changes. Trey McBride over Zach Ertz, I think is
that's
another
happening.
One.
That's happening.
And this is how, in the first development isn't always the last. We may start seeing Trey McBride more in even those passing situations. We may see Zach Ertz get traded before the deadline. You never know. So
now, can we love to talk about things we've learned. One of the things that I've found interesting this season is for limited offenses with shaky quarterbacks and exactly one good wide receiver, that wide receiver's retained really good fantasy value, whether it's Garrett Wilson, whether it's Marquise Brown, that, they're even though defenses only need to take away that guy, we're finding that there are cases like that where bad offenses and questionable passers can still keep fantasy relevancy on their 1A receiver.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's been something as I'm setting my lineup and going, oh boy. All right, am I going to really trust Joshua Dobbs to get the ball to Marquise Brown, who I've got a lot of? Okay, we're gonna give it a shot, and it's worked out more often than it hasn't.
Yeah, it's true, and that's why some of these again looking for the next Adam Thielen has become interesting.
Yeah, another perfect example.
And looking for players, and like that's why maybe this time around it's New England, probably not. Maybe it'll work with Kendrick Bourne. Okay, I want to take up this topic as we go off the rails. We've taken up lots and lots of topics and a lot of stuff that's super self-indulgent and just stuff that we like to talk about. But I wanted to ask you, because I know that you more than once now, a topic in your social media conversation that you brought up is potentially dodgy marketing strategies by the NFL.
Yes, that is true.
And I want to take it lightly. And I suppose I don't want to. I'm going to do it because it's my show and I can do it if I want to.
Yes, you can.
So I'm going to preemptively, and of course, people, we're talking about Taylor Swift. We're talking about the Chargers fan. I guess this was just this. I didn't even catch this, but I saw some kerfuffle about it.
Yeah.
I still think for all this stuff stands for, as far as I'm concerned, Paul, is the NFL is a multi-billion-dollar cartel. Okay, they are concerned with one thing and one thing only, and that is money. And I think we should be more surprised if we saw them do something that wasn't just to enhance profits and actually was genuine or was authentically about the fan enjoyment or fan experience or otherwise something that they got no material gain from. Then we should be surprised if they are doing potentially dishonest things or things that are, behind the scenes, there's strings being pulled to deceive us. That seems to me, Paul, that would just be right in line with what we should expect from the NFL.
You and I share a distrust of institutional power, which I love about you, and that includes the NFL. And so to me, nothing's necessarily off the table. What you're alluding to is my suggestion, and I'm not saying I necessarily buy into this, but I think it's worth discussion.
Yeah,
that the whole Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift relationship.
Then congratulations to them.
Well, if it's legitimate, I mean the
NFL. I mean the NFL.
Yes,
it worked.
It's brilliant.
It worked.
Brilliant. So
you're getting a bunch of people who didn't care about football to talk about football.
Bang. That's it, right? So you're the NFL. You've tapped out people like us, right? You've saturated our demographic, basically men and lots of women. But what you don't have is young teenage girls and younger women. So how can we reach it? Okay, let's see. Strategy.
What do they care about?
What do they have in common? I mean, what do they have in common? They got Taylor Swift in common.
Right. I was talking to my 10-year-old stepson about the Taylor Swift movie, I guess, was out this weekend.
Yeah,
right?
Eras.
And he was talking about how the girls in his 5th grade class all went to see the movie. And I said, "Oh, did the girls in your class like Taylor Swift?" He said, "Sig, every girl likes Taylor Swift."
Right. So okay. Now, for this, I'm gonna play this out, and you can decide for your own. 90% of people are not listening to this at all. The premise is that this was a coordinated effort between Kelce, Taylor Swift, and the NFL.
Yeah.
And this has to go back to like springtime, right? You have to. This is for all the planning and all the execution, and everything that's got to come around on this. Taylor Swift's massive tour from this summer played exclusively and only in NFL markets and in NFL stadiums. Now, those are the best venues for sure, but really the only spots There were no stops in any other markets. There were no arenas that weren't NFL-owned arenas. Okay, maybe. That's item number one. Item number two to suggest there's a relationship here. This summer, it just so happened that every time a Taylor Swift concert was coming to town over the course of the summer, this is pre-training camp predominantly, the NFL team in town, she's playing Seattle, the Seahawks social media team is doing all this promotion around Taylor Swift, right? Hey, Noah Fant, what's your favorite song? That kind of stuff, right? So, at a slow time of year, they were mobilizing on this, and the team's websites and apps and social media filled with Taylor Swift content. Then you get to the season, and it just so happens that all of a sudden, out of the blue, Travis Kelce is on every single commercial break I've got.
Yeah, he and Ken Griffey Jr.
Suddenly, good for Ken, by the way, in his retirement. Good for him. Kelce was not he had a couple of endorsements, I think, but he wasn't like every single break. I'm looking at Travis Kelce's face. That's a huge change, suggesting a long-term coordinated effort to get him exposure. And then the last thing that I'll mention, there are other little side things too, but this from 2 weeks ago, the NFL asked its media partners to promote Taylor Swift's concerts or her movie that was coming out 2 weeks ago at no cost. They made that ask. You're a partner of ours. We want you to promote this. Why? Mm-hmm. I understand this is good. This is good business for them, but that's all of this suggests this thing could be coordinated. Plus, by the way, have we seen any confirmation or even evidence that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are romantically?
Well, I think there was a report that they were like cavorting and about, and there were lots of PDAs, Paul. Lots of PDAs. Maybe. But that doesn't even matter. That's not evidence for or against this. That's Correct. Not evidence for or against this. But here's why, and I think you're right, and I think it's fun to put the pieces together. It's fun to do investigations. It's fun to try to find where the strings are in the puppet master's hand, right? If indeed this is what's happening, it would only be the 17,483rd instance of publicists getting together to do something to juke profits.
Right.
That's the thing, right? I mean, this is so heard of in the in the universe of heard of things, like forces that be making a relationship to make someone relevant or cleanse their public image or put them in the mouths of people that they want talking about them. Yes. This is like, that's what publicists get paid to do, right? What I think is most interesting about this, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up also, is I think it's undeniable that in this arrangement, assuming this is an arrangement, right? The NFL is coming to Taylor Swift hat in hand and saying,
how about that?
Can we do something?
Yes.
Who's bigger? Who has more influence? Who has more sway right now? Who's courting who here? It's the NFL saying, hey, maybe we could work together. It's not Taylor Swift. It's not Taylor Swift. And
the NFL needs Taylor Swift more than Taylor Swift probably needs the NFL.
Taylor Swift doesn't need the NFL for anything at all. Nothing. Taylor Swift needs the NFL for nothing.
People have suggested that this whole theory is crackpot because they already have money, and I'm like, in the history of mankind, they always want money. They always want more. They always want more. Just because they're both incredibly successful entities does not necessarily mean that they have not coordinated on this relationship. And you know what? And to your point, regardless of whether or not Travis Kelce has gotten to third base with Taylor Swift or not, does not change the fact that this could be coordinated. It might be turned out that they do like each other.
Well, sure. That's a perfect rom-com. That's the rom-com.
Right.
That's it. Sure. That's it, Paul. The football player and the pop star, their publicists say, we got something really good for you guys. Like, really? Do I gotta? Well, there's $700 million in for you, and there's $1.7 billion in for you. Well, I guess why not? And then they really fall in love.
Yeah,
it's a real thing, right?
Exactly. It could happen.
So that's how the stories would work out in reality, right? I mean, it's not as clean. It's not as simple. Nothing is as simple as it seems. But that's why we love to get together and talk about it and hang out and do all the things we do. And I'm glad we got to have this conversation, as always, Paul. And hopefully next time you come on, we won't be talking about injuries, but we will be talking about the clues, piecing together the clues of the future of the Vikings and the future of all the fantasy football teams, of all the wonderful people who give us their time and attention and give us the privilege and pleasure of serving them. All of you people, we love you. You're wonderful. You're so very classy.